those that are joining, I'll try and just a bit of intro stuff and housekeeping to give a few people a chance to sign on and join the session. To those that have literally just joined, my name's Alistair, your host for this evening. You may have received an invite and expected Matt Craven to be on this evening. Matt's preoccupied, I'm afraid, so I'm taking the load this evening for this webinar. Matt ran the last session that we did a couple of weeks back for CV writing, so I know some of you watched that session as well. There'll be a little bit of duplication this evening, just really as regards content. So for those that listen to Matt's CV writing session, I'll try and keep that to a minimum, but I'm afraid I've got to recover some ground for reasons that will become apparent. Tonight's event, a bit like a couple of weeks ago, is audio one-way only, so however you've got your system set up, you should be able to see some slides on the screen, hear my voice, but I can't see you and I can't hear you. Consequently, to deal with questions, which I'm quite happy to answer as many as you can hurl in my general direction, it's best to use the facility you've got in your GoToWebinar toolbar. You can either ask questions during the session or at the end, but I'll leave the answers till the end. Got a lot of stuff to go through, so a fairly pacey session, I hope. And what I'll do is I'll let you know when we've done. It'll sort of become obvious. And then for those that want to listen to answers to the questions, irrespective of whether you've asked any or not, more than welcome to stay on, and then I'll just go through them one by one. Doesn't look like there's that many people on that will prevent me from answering every question asked, so I'll take a gamble and suggest that I will be able to answer everything that you throw at me. Okay, let's kick off. This evening's event is targeted really to make sure that we give you some of the key clues as to making LinkedIn work for you as a contractor, freelancer, interim person, whatever you are. We're not here to recommend whether you should or should not be on LinkedIn. That's your business. We have no axe to grind positive or negatively about LinkedIn. That's your decision. But if you're on it, or if you're wanting to use any tools at your disposal to increase the likelihood of people recognizing you, finding you, hiring you, interviewing you, whatever, ultimately to get more work, then that's what this evening's all about. Just a little bit about who on earth we are. Again, I'm afraid those that saw the CV event, there's a little bit of duplication, but I will keep it very briefly, very brief. Bottom line is, we've been invited by Contractor Weekly to provide this session this evening. Obviously, it's free to attend. We're a separate company. We're all about providing CV writing, career enhancement services and products. So we rewrite people's CVs, LinkedIn profiles, interview coaching, etc., etc. As far as my background is concerned, I've worked both in corporate life and employed people. I've worked in recruitment for my sins, both in contract and permanent. I've reviewed probably knocking on for 10,000 CVs and increasingly people's LinkedIn profiles, and I write the same as well. So, well, I'm not trying to big myself up unnecessarily. I'm really just trying to give you, hopefully, the confidence that we know what we're talking about. What we do day in, day out for people that come to us works. We know it works, and I'll show you some proof of that later on this evening. Just a few other bits and pieces. We have some credibility in the marketplace, we'd like to think. We're an affiliated member of PCG. We do a lot of work with them. Matt's pioneered the contract-style CV. So if you were on the session a couple of weeks ago, you'll know more about that slightly different style of CV for contractors. If there's anybody who wasn't on that session and you'd like to know a little bit more about that, bring a question in the facility and I'll try and deal with that later on this evening after we've done the LinkedIn bit. But Matt pioneered that structure and format in the marketplace, and it's a really successful way of getting across your message to employers and such like. It's really important, as with the CV, that if you're going to market and you're using LinkedIn or indeed your own website or any other collateral to get your message across, you understand what the hot skills are in the marketplace. I'm afraid there are going to be a few cliches flying around this evening, hot skills being the first of them. And that's all about what the market demands at any moment in time, what it responds to. Sometimes they're not the most logical of things, I have to say. It's like anything. You've got an audience. You're trying to target them with a message. whatever that audience perceives to be the most important thing or most relevant thing at a moment in time, if you can align yourself with that message, you're going to do better. Stands to reason. A bit like if you've bought a product or service recently of your own, be it a car, a piece of hi-fi, a kitchen appliance, a boat if you're lucky enough. You won't have bought it on a whim. You'll have been persuaded through various mechanisms to make the purchase, or at least consider the purchase. You as a contractor, freelancer, interim manager, whatever status you occupy, it's a similar proposition. Understanding what the market is expecting at any moment in time is really important to getting that proposition well sorted and articulated, and that's really what we're talking about this evening. It's not the nuances of LinkedIn as a technical animal, it's about how to get your message across as effectively as possible so it works to your advantage. Sounds a bit of an obvious question. What is LinkedIn? Well, I think people have a bit of a misunderstanding about what it is. It's not, and I have to tread a sort of fairly average line. So for those people who understand it well, forgive me, I'm going to sort of maybe teach you to suck eggs a bit. For those that don't understand it or are maybe a bit cynical about it, which is understandable, bottom line is it's a professional networking site. It's not a social networking site in the way that you might understand Facebook or Twitter to be. And some people misunderstand that and they think they have to be on LinkedIn, it ought to occupy a vast chunk of their time, and that by committing themselves to being on LinkedIn, it will occupy their time and they have to talk to people about irrelevant subject matter, etc., etc. None of that is necessarily true. If you've got a profile, there's nothing to compel you to give LinkedIn loads of information. What you give it is your business. There's nothing to compel you to participate on a regular basis. There's quite a lot of people who've made a very successful profile and career out of their profile merely by having a presence which they change when something material changes. That could be every 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, 12 months, 24 months. It matters not. Key thing, as I'll keep going on and on and on about, is the content that you have on your profile, much like the content you have on your CV and possibly your own website if you have one. Same principle applies. The importance lurking behind LinkedIn, a number of reasons why it's really important, which we'll touch on shortly, is the vast number of people that are attracted to it for whatever reasons. Every time I run one of these sessions, certainly every month, the number keeps creeping up, and it's something over 250 million people globally right now. So, as I said earlier, we're not here to promote whether you should be on it or not. That's your call. What we are here to do is to say if you're going to be on it, it can make sense. There is some logic behind it. You need to get it right because there are an awful lot of people looking at it and using it to make important decisions, decisions that may affect your own future. Who are these people on LinkedIn? Well, again, I'm not going to go into detail here because there's all sorts of people. Really what I'm trying to do is give an impression that there are all sorts of folk using LinkedIn for all sorts of reasons. So you pick and choose the bit that's relevant to you, but because there's such a varied bunch of folk using it for a variety of reasons, you can decide, or it might help you decide whether you ought to play an active role or a more active role, if at all. So you've got what a lot of people see it as being for job seekers. So they're out there looking for people to network with, to find opportunities, and to actually find jobs. There are an increasingly large number of jobs, permanent, contract, and all sorts on LinkedIn. So people are actively using it to find opportunities. There are people out there just doing genuine research. Now that research could be across all sorts of levels. It could be research into subject matter, types of people, opportunities, trends, all sorts. So if you're in a particular space and you're an expert or approaching that kind of status, being on LinkedIn and creating the right picture in somebody's mind could attract all sorts of interest, some of which you might not expect, but actually could lead to new opportunities purely because people find you, see that you've got expertise in a particular area, and it's very easy for them to, of course, contact you. It would have been difficult for them to have found you through any other mechanic, and there's no way that most people could have a personal website, be it for them as an individual or as a business entity, limited business, and obtain the same kind of reach. There's obviously the other side of the job-seeking proposition, which is the recruiters themselves. This is the real engine behind LinkedIn for reasons that I'll show you shortly. So there are people on there, recruiters, hiring managers, actually actively looking for talent, for people. There are employers doing it to try and save recruitment fees, do stuff on the cheap. They might have invested a few quid in an enhanced membership package or a specific recruitment package, and they're desperately looking to sweat that asset. So they'll be looking to find people, permanent and contract, via LinkedIn. Particularly true of smaller businesses where they really want to keep the costs down and just see if they can find the appropriate people who will fix a problem for them. But there's also the big recruiters, the small recruiters, the medium-sized recruiters using LinkedIn as much as they can to shortcut the process of finding talent. All sorts of other people, entrepreneurs looking out there to try and maximize the impact of their business who might be on the lookout for talent, permanent, short-term, contract, whatever. And of course there's salespeople out there trying to find contacts, which you could be in that mode when you're looking for business and potentially new clients. So lots of different people using it for lots of different reasons. Now one of the reasons, it applies less to most contractors in fairness, but if some people throw back to us and say, well, I'm concerned that by being active on LinkedIn, people might assume that I'm looking out for something else. Now, for a contractor, that generally is less of a worry. But a few say to us, I want to be on LinkedIn, I want to participate, but I don't want to give the impression that I'm actively looking to move on. And in some cases, that is a legitimate concern. But the reality is, for all these reasons, because all these various groups of individuals are on LinkedIn, actively using it and participating, you as an individual being on there, as long as you're doing things within reason, you're not really going to raise too much of a concern. It's becoming more and more the norm to be active and participative within LinkedIn and its environment. I sort of hinted at this recruitment angle being a big driver behind both individuals and corporate activity. And again, what a lot of people underestimate is how much of LinkedIn's revenues are generated through recruitment activity. It's now making more money from selling its subscriptions to recruiters and employers or their HR departments than it does anything else, and it's growing and growing and growing, and there's some more stuff to back that up shortly. So whatever your view of it as a vehicle, the inevitable conclusion is that it's helping lots of people get visibility they'd otherwise struggle to get, and that's the point. But what people find when they land on your profile is quite important, of course, and we're going to touch on that. Now, as far as contractors are concerned, most people tend to want to use LinkedIn, obviously, to get visibility and to win work. So, again, if there are any questions about this, we can dig into it afterwards. But the most basic use of you wanting to drive the process of winning more opportunities comes through how you actively use LinkedIn as well as the actual content, the core content. So as I said earlier, you can actually jump on there and search for jobs and apply. A lot of people don't realise that. They think recruiters look at them and find them as an individual and approach them. But if you haven't actually uncovered that gem yet, get on LinkedIn, search for jobs. It's quite easy. Opportunities are on there, and you can actually participate in that activity. If you're doing research, a lot of people use LinkedIn. It's quite powerful to do research on the companies, the people within the companies, and network within those environments. You can search for people who can make decisions. It's normally quite clear who those people are, and see if you are able to connect with them, link up with them, and put them into your network. And they will stay there for a long time, and that will expose you to their network, etc., etc. So it makes the whole process of getting hold of people far more easy. You can also you leverage your own network to get introduced to other people who are beyond your immediate contacts. It takes effort. You don't have to do it, but you can do it, and people who are successful at making this work proactively are doing these kind of things. But as a strategy, you don't need to do them. You don't have to do these things to make your profile work. This is just some of the ways that people use it actively at the moment if they want to participate in LinkedIn and proactively take a stance as opposed to just wait for things to arrive at their doorstep. One very useful way if you're building, particularly if you're moving into a new area or you're gaining expertise, or you're trying to build a reputation, is participate in the LinkedIn question and answer sessions that exist. Again, it helps build your profile, it builds awareness, and it gains credibility. And if you're really good at figuring out who's important and who isn't, you can use the group facility, so join groups, where you'd expect to find hiring managers as the key members. So there's so many groups on LinkedIn. You can join groups that are associated with your interest area, your area of specialism, industrial sector, associations that represent those elements, and lurking away in some of the groups are groups of people whose prime aim is to find talent and to hire people. If you can find those, join them. You get access to people that are ultimately making a decision about who they hire and for what. And importantly, it's a great way of getting testimonial evidence, not just necessarily through LinkedIn's recommendations, which is a way and can be quite powerful. You can waste that opportunity as well by getting the wrong people to recommend you, or you indeed recommending the wrong people. That's another subject. But if you can contact previous clients and get them to provide testimonial evidence to back up your skill set and deliverance, then that's really important. And we always try and encourage people to backtrack and go and seek out that where you can. Some people won't do it. That's fine if that's their policy. Some people will. And if you can get people of authority with credibility to back up what you've done and delivered in your past life, then that can be really useful, both for LinkedIn but also on your CV. But the key thing that helps you win work, so all of those things I've talked about really are proactive things that you can do if you wanted to. But if you just set up LinkedIn and had a good, effective profile with strong content and sat back, it should still work for you, which is why you don't have to be participative if you don't want to be. And one of the things that really highlights is that there's the highlight in red on the screen now. It's just an article that I think was released sometime in February of this year. So it's not that old, but most people don't know it happened. And it revolves LinkedIn's purchase, one of these infamous purchases of a company that nobody's ever heard of for a very large sum of money. And the interesting thing about it is this company that LinkedIn acquired, called Bright Media, basically specialize in algorithms, which seems to be the market to be in right now. But the algorithms they're really interested in are those that match job candidates with prospective employers. Now, I don't really understand the detail of this in the sense of what it's going to do differently from anybody else, but it just clearly points in one direction, which most recruiters fear, particularly the big ones, which is LinkedIn's just going to become more and more focused on the recruitment market to generate revenues and growth. They have a massive database of candidates. Interestingly, until this happened, if you ask most recruiters, their average response would be, and I was in this space a while back when LinkedIn was in its more formative days, but you could see the trend that more and more people would report back that they were getting a better quality of hire through LinkedIn than other sources. And that's just got stronger and stronger and stronger. And so our message is you can't really fight that. And if LinkedIn are going to spend a few £100 million on a business that designs algorithms to match people with employers, it's clearly signaling a trend. So you need to have a pretty good reason as to why you wouldn't be on LinkedIn if you're interested in finding work and seizing opportunities, because that is where it's heading. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about what you should be doing with your profile if you're going to set out and actually have an effective profile. Now, this will sort of touch on some of the subject matter that was covered off in the CV webinar a couple of weeks ago, but one of the common mistakes people make, and I would encourage you to be diagnostic about this, self-diagnostic about this, and ask yourself some questions. Most people tend to use whatever CV they've got right now and dump it in LinkedIn. In a way, LinkedIn doesn't help because it encourages you to do the very same thing. Its structure is, of course, very similar to a CV. Most people tend to take the view, I need a LinkedIn profile. There's a lot of information to fill in here. It looks very similar to the information I've got on my CV. I don't really want to spend a lot of time on this. I'll just dump what I've got on my CV, either in whole or in part, into my LinkedIn profile. Job done, off I go and do something more important. But that presupposes that your CV is actually effective. And for those that attended the last webinar, you might have gone away with a fairly strong thought that maybe the CV isn't as effective as it should be. So that's a dangerous mistake. Just a quick recap for those that were on that webinar. I'm not sure how much detail Matt went into this, but the acid test for whether your CV is effective or not is, of course, its ability to generate interviews for you or some form of engagement. So we always say to people, it doesn't matter what anybody tells you technically about your CV, if it's not getting you interviews for opportunities that you believe you're technically capable of performing, it's pretty much down to the quality of the information you're sending. And for most people, that's still the CV. The CV is the initiating factor. What tends to happen thereafter is people will take a look at your LinkedIn profile. There is a lot of evidence to say it's happening in reverse now. A lot of people will find your LinkedIn profile, possibly when there's no job being advertised or available, assess you, and then move on or engage with you depending on what they thought of your profile. Now, the trouble with that, unless you've got an enhanced profile where you can track some of those visitors and indeed whether those people have actually allowed them to see your profile if you have been visited by them, you're not going to know about that. You'll not know how many people visited your profile and discarded you or rejected you, as opposed to those that actually contacted you or wanted to contact you about something relevant. So bottom line is, the thing that you can measure, if you're applying for opportunities and if you're getting interest and that interest is healthy, then it suggests your CV is doing a good job. That would therefore suggest if you are copying and pasting it into your LinkedIn profile, you're probably okay. It's not harming your prospects. But for a lot of people, they've got an ineffective CV. They put their lack of interviews down to other factors, which may seem plausible from the recruiter or employer's point of view, but aren't really the reality. The reality is they didn't like your message, so they reject the application. They'll never get around to looking at your profile because there'll have been no reason to. You need to do something about that message. Our view, as again witnessed by the CV session, is that if you're going to market, whether that be your CV, your LinkedIn profile, or indeed your own website if you have one, you should be presenting a strong business case as to why somebody should be interested in, well, first of all, interviewing you, let alone hiring you. So the CV's job is really to get you in front of somebody, and then once you're in front of somebody, people can start to imagine hiring you for a particular contract or project. Now, we'll talk a little bit about what business case means, but it comes as no surprise, I guess, that, you know, in our view, a bad CV, as evidenced by any stats you want to throw at the situation, bad CV or a LinkedIn profile is basically just a list of stuff. So if you've got a CV or a LinkedIn profile right now that is really just lists of technical skills, contracts that you've had with no real meat on the bone, functional skills, possibly even behavioural skills, which are a real no-no, then you're not really differentiating yourself from other people in the market unless you've got a truly unique skill, and most people don't, unfortunately. A much more effective way is to go to market with a business case. So why should somebody be investing £250, £450, £600 a day, or X number of £1,000 for a fixed contract, or whatever amount of money and however it might be carved up? What's the return you can offer on that investment is your business case, or a pretty big clue as to what that return is going to be. Get that right, get that business case sorted, and it will get more interviews and more engagement with the kind of people you want to talk with. Get it wrong, and it will be the reason why you get rejected more often than not. And it is almost as black and white as that. Whatever anybody tells you, the harsh reality is most people react to the message you've sent them, and that's all they can do. So what are the areas on LinkedIn, therefore, that form this business case and you should focus on? Well, there are three key areas. There are 4 sections that I'll talk about a lot, but there are 3 really key areas that, if you get them right, constitute what we'd call a strong business case. They are similar to the areas on a CV, but not exactly the same. And interestingly, the style of a CV is different from the style of a LinkedIn profile if you're sort of following best practice, which is another reason why just copying and pasting doesn't tend to work so well. So the first area of the profile, which a lot of people underestimate, and some people don't even know where it is by name, that helps build this business case, is the professional headline. And the professional headline basically ought to be, I'll show you where it is in a minute, but it ought to be, and another cliche I'm afraid, your value proposition. What is it that you're on this planet to do? What is the return on somebody's investment that you might offer, or at least a pretty big clue towards it? If you don't know what your value proposition is, how you're going to return somebody's investment, then that's something you need to sort out, I would recommend, and we'll touch on that shortly, and I'll show you an example. And you certainly ought not to be leaving the professional headline to the default setting that LinkedIn will rather unhelpfully offer to set for you. So typically, the default setting for this piece of text which appears under your name on your LinkedIn profile is a combination of whatever job title you last had and the employer that you either had or have right now. And it sort of blends the two. So a finance director at XYZ PLC would be the default setting. And most people tend to go with that because they think, yeah, it's another piece of time saved. It's obviously LinkedIn recommending that that's what I do, so therefore it must be right. Now, finance director at XYZ PLC is not necessarily the worst crime of the century in terms of the message, but where it tends not to work is if you've got an odd job title, or the last thing that you did, which LinkedIn picks up on by default, isn't representative of what you want to be doing next. And where this particularly harms contractors is if you can wear more than one hat and you've only got one space for professional headline, if it defaults to the last thing that you did or are currently doing and you don't want to wear that hat next time round, as soon as somebody reads your profile, they're getting the wrong message, or at least they're getting the message you don't want them to see or don't want to prioritize. So you harm your cases as soon as anybody sees your name and reads a bit of text immediately underneath. And it's just like the CV. You're likely to get a few seconds of somebody's time and attention. If you're presenting them already with the wrong message, it's either working against you because they'll waste your time at some point during the application process, or you'll not get the engagement because the person reading your profile is sent off on the wrong direction. So even a simple thing like that piece of text under your name can make a big difference to the business case that you're presenting to your target audience. So in the finance director's case, a piece of text just explaining that they are experienced and they've got a track record of protecting cash flow and profitability is a far more effective statement, assuming that that's what they're targeting going forwards. If they wanted to do something else, if they wanted to perhaps go to MD or something like that, then, or switch industry, they need to think a little bit harder about what that message is. But it's really important. On the screen now is Matt's own LinkedIn profile, and I'm highlighting now with a nice big red oval his professional headline. So you'll see that although he's mentioned what his title is, that's because it infers, you know, he's the head honcho, but the bulk of the text has got nothing to do with his title, and it doesn't actually mention where he's currently working, because that's not his value proposition. He works for a business that most people have never heard of. So putting it up in the professional headline doesn't help his cause one iota. People aren't interested in who he works for. What people might be interested in, and you could argue this until the cows come home, but what he's chosen to go with is the fact that the bottom line is he can drive success in the job market for people interested in that. Now that's a far more effective message. If he said MD at CVIA Limited, which is the legal entity, what does that mean? Who the hell's CVIA Limited? And for most contractors, they've got a limited business that's either their own name or some other name that most people will never have heard of. So saying director of, MD of, CEO, if you're that way inclined, of your own business, doesn't really send the best message out to your target audience. What they probably want to see is, are you capable of fixing the problem at a level that they're prepared to invest X number of £1,000 in? It's that kind of value proposition. So just a simple thing like that makes a big, big difference and helps differentiate you from the average person who will be going with LinkedIn default setting. And I would imagine most people on this evening probably have either some words in here that they've concocted or the default setting. And often what the some words are, and again from contractors is not the right message, is available now, currently seeking, yeah, available immediately, please call me, please, please, please call me. That kind of sentiment, and some people are almost that close to those very words, just doesn't help your cause unless you're taking a risk and just seeing whether a sort of gimmicky approach might work. Most professional business people won't respond to that. They see it as a sign of desperation as opposed to a value add. So that's the first area, professional headline. It's not the be-all and end-all, but it is an important scene setter. Second area of the three that are important to building your business case on LinkedIn is the summary. And much like on the CV, if you've got an opening statement on your CV, if it contains any reference to enthusiasm, dedication, commitment, passion, ability to work in isolation or as a team, giving 110%, great interpersonal skills, great communication skills, any of that stuff, it's not differentiating you. None of that stuff can be proven on a CV, interestingly. None of it can be proven on a LinkedIn profile. And it's very hard to prove some of that, even at interview, to be honest. So ignore all the behavioural traits. If you've got any of that on your CV or LinkedIn profile right now, I'd suggest that that's removed. And although that maybe sound a bit aggressive and confrontational, it's the harsh reality. Recruiters and employers most of all glaze over all of that. It's not adding any value. It's not describing what benefits you can bring. It's just describing a whole heap of stuff that most people think they should talk about, but actually doesn't add value. So in your summary, be it on the CV or the LinkedIn profile, you need to describe and reflect pretty much what you are. So if you're a project manager, say you're a project manager. You may say an experienced Prince 2 qualified project manager, or words to that effect. But you need to reflect what your target audience would be expecting to see from their ideal candidate as close as you can. If you wear more than one hat, so if you're a project manager, business analyst, and possibly a tester, if you're in IT or something like that, you need to get that message. You need to be a bit careful with that message, but there are all sorts of ways of getting that message across, particularly on LinkedIn, where you can be a bit more fluid and a bit more open. But you do need to give people that clear indication of what you are. Unsurprisingly, the next thing is actually what do you do? What are you on this planet to do? Which is a little bit about the value proposition, linking that to the things you're good at. Most people tend to be good at 3 or 4 core things that they can really justify their daily rate, hourly rate, monthly rate, salary, whatever it is that you're gunning for. Let's take a look at an example. Again, this is same person as we looked at earlier, this mythical finance director. I won't read it verbatim, you can read it for yourselves, but this is a good opening summary. It's describing what they are. They're a finance director. It's describing what they do and what they're good at and where they can add value through a variety of means, but it all revolves around this ability to protect cash flow and profitability and embedding financial governance. And there's a list of things that this person's got or would appear to have good, strong experience within. Now you'll notice there's no reference there to any behavioural traits that I mentioned earlier. That's deliberate, and because none of those things can be proven, they do not add value. They're skills that people look for, but they're assessed at a much later part of the process. You know, when you physically meet somebody and talk to somebody, they will judge whether you've got the behavioural traits they might be interested in. And for a lot of contractors, they're the least important things anyway. What you're really being paid to do is to deliver a particular issue in a particular time period, and that's the most important thing. So your CV and profile need to reflect that ability to deliver, not your ability to smile and be enthusiastic. Here's Matt's profile again with the summary highlighted this time. So it's that piece of text that just falls underneath your sort of LinkedIn header. And again, in Matt's case, it's describing, you know, what does he do, what is he, what value can he add, etc., etc. Okay, brief interlude. Firstly, to remind people that if they want to ask any questions, then please just tap away in the facility that you've got on your toolbar, and I will come round to them at the end of the session, which we're not far off now in the great scheme of things. I will just briefly explain now something that a lot of people asked after the CV session. Apparently, according to Matt, we've got a lot of questions about this, so we thought we'd better provide a bit more information about what we can do. So a lot of people will arrive at this evening, thinking, is my CV up to scratch? You might have addressed that. If you didn't see that webinar, then as I say, if you've got any questions, I'll try and address them as briefly as possible later on this evening once we've done with the LinkedIn bit. And others may be thinking, okay, well, yeah, it's not up to scratch. My LinkedIn profile's not up to scratch. What do I do? And as you'll know from the CV session, we can provide professional help. And we deal mainly with people who are fairly savvy. They're either running their own businesses or under an umbrella company, and or fairly high up in an organisation if their perm is. They either don't have the time or the expertise or both to write their own CV and LinkedIn profile and say, please help. So we can. And we do that. If we do get involved in that, it's from scratch. It's not amending things. It's not tweaking things. That's not technically possible. You have to start from scratch. And we say to people, yeah, if you're successful in the marketplace, then you don't need to do anything. If you're getting the 7, 8, 9 out of 10 interviews that you're applying for, as long as you're applying for relevant jobs, that's happy days. You don't really need to worry. You don't really improve on that materially. But if you're in the no interviews, 1, 2, 3 out of the 10 applications you're getting interviews for, it would suggest there's something wrong with the message, and that message can be fixed. Technically, it's really simple. Logistically, it's a challenge for reasons that I'll very briefly explain. So when we get involved with our clients, we're interviewing them for probably an hour and a half to 2 hours on average, extracting from them a whole heap of raw data that help us clarify whether what you're trying to do is actually realistic in the first place. More often than not, it is realistic, in fairness. We don't meet too many people who are unrealistic about their aims, but we meet an awful lot of people who are going to market with exactly the wrong message, and it's surprising how wrong it is sometimes. But for those active in the market or regularly active in the contract market, you'll have the stats to back that up. If you struggle to get opportunities, it's because your message is probably wrong, not because you don't have the skills to offer. It's just people don't get that from whatever you're sending them. If you don't already know it or are unclear about it, we will help work out what your value proposition is, and in a crude way, and some people have a problem with this, but I'm afraid you are a brand of such. You're representing the products and services that you can offer to a marketplace. You are seen as such by the marketplace, like a brand. How you market that brand is critical, and we can help you with that. And we'll figure out, those that were on the CV webinar will know that we bring out certain highlights of the career to provide the evidence to back up what you're good at. Now, we're going to talk about how you do that on LinkedIn very shortly, because there's a really good way on LinkedIn of collecting that evidence and presenting it effectively. But a lot of people pick the wrong examples or weak examples, or they don't pick any examples at all, and they leave it to the imagination of the recruiter or hiring manager to imagine how good they might be, and I'm afraid that just tends not to happen in today's marketplace. So we'll work on you and build up those achievements. And we can write content for sections of LinkedIn, or indeed the CV, so we can add a lot of contractors, build up a portfolio of their work and experience, which they can then use to customize their CV and or LinkedIn profile. So one of the issues, as you'll know from the CV event, those who are on it, is that contractors often have very long CVs, or they're fighting the desire to have a long CV because they've done lots of different things in short bursts of time, all of which seems quite important and relevant, but how do you communicate that to an audience who only really wants to give you a few seconds of their time? So one of the ways around that is don't send all the information to everybody all the time. Be selective. So we can give the content to people, and then they can pre-select what's important and what isn't, what's relevant, what isn't for a particular audience. So you've only ever got a CV that's maybe 2 or 3 pages long, but is always very tightly focused to your target market. or target audience. And interestingly, when you're talking specifically about LinkedIn, although this is a bit of a technical issue, we can, as you can indeed, if you're changing your profile, there are ways of switching off the various broadcasts. You get probably recipient of lots of emails from people who've changed this and changed that on their profile. That can be disabled either permanently or temporarily whilst we're updating your profile. So it minimizes that sort of hurl of information about every single change in your LinkedIn life. Later we'll come on to some of the details surrounding that. If you're interested in taking that as an option, if you desire it as a professional that you really could be getting on with better things, I'll explain how we can help you with that and the costs involved. Okay, enough of the interlude. I promise I've come on to this. This is the third area of how you can build an effective business case. So it's all to do with the LinkedIn profile, of course. We talked about the professional headline, first thing, the summary, second thing, and this is an area called projects in LinkedIn, which again a lot of people tend not to use, and a lot of people don't even realize exists. But projects is the place to add the evidence to back up what you're capable of. And if you go into your profile and edit it, go edit profile, the screen will look something like this on the screen right now. It's my own profile from some time ago. You'll find down the right-hand side somewhere the area that I've ovaled in red, unsurprisingly called projects, and you click on that, and you'll get a screen something like this, which doesn't look too exciting right now, but I'll show you an example of how we construct the content shortly. Again, for those that were on the CV webinar, you'll remember that Matt talked about building up case study evidence or career highlights. And he will also have talked about these two styles of CVs, one with a modest amount of evidence and one with quite a lot of evidence, specifically for contractors who work in an environment where the recruiters understand what on earth a contractor is. And you'd have a CV with far more evidence on it, far more case studies. Those case studies port across onto LinkedIn almost verbatim. Works really well. And so what you do is, a project is an assignment or an event. You could have a number of projects within one contract. It's quite possible. We often write CVs for people who pick out 3 really good examples from one contract because they're very relevant, very appropriate examples of what they're able to deliver for a client. You give it a nice name, almost not quite as brash as a Sun headline, but not far off it, something to attract the eye. And so you can give each project a title. You can, if you choose to, you don't have to, but you could link the project to one of your contracts if you've detailed that contract on LinkedIn. There's no obligation to list everything you've done on LinkedIn. Unlike on a CV, you don't have to do that. So you can pick and choose. So for the people who need to wear more than one hat, LinkedIn actually can be very useful because you can choose at any one moment in time. Okay, it takes a little bit of work, but if you wanted to, you could position people to see you more as whichever hat you wanted to wear at a given moment in time. Then you put in the description of the project. Now, we'll cover this shortly, so this will not mean to people who didn't attend the CV webinar, this won't mean anything right now, or it'll sound like a load of gobbledygook. But if you remember those STAR methodology case studies that were talked about in the CV webinar, this is where you dump them. You dump the text in here within one of the projects. You'd click on Save, and then you land up with a really nice portfolio of evidence to support your abilities. You can have far more on LinkedIn than you would have on a CV because you're not constrained in the same way because of space. But realistically, I think a number anywhere between 3 and 8 is a pretty good number to have. Here's an example. So for those people that weren't on the CV webinar, we use a methodology called STAR to construct these projects, or on the CV we tend to call them career highlights, or assignment portfolio if you're going down the contract route in terms of the style of CV. And STAR stands for situation, task, action, result. It's used by lots of people, and there's variations on a theme with either more or less letters in there, but the principles are very similar. Again, look at the paragraph. I won't read it verbatim, but the situation is the opening sentence, the describer, if you like, the scene setter. And in this case, it's that a company, ERAC, which stands for Enterprise Rent-A-Car, just so you know, but Enterprise Rent-A-Car are quite a business, and it needs sorted out, needed sorting out. The task is the next sentence. So this person, this is actually off Matt's CV, interestingly, in his earlier life. He was appointed operations manager to sort things out by doing a few things. That's the task, that was the responsibility resting on his shoulders. He then did a number of things, the actions, which form the bulk of the remaining text. And then the final sentence is the result. So he succeeded in rebranding the business, achieving a certain level of profitability within a certain time frame. So in a nutshell, and it is almost a nutshell, it's a nice concise piece of content, well written, quite clear. Nobody needs to know the detail. Matt could have probably written a book on this event in his life if he'd want to do, but nobody would be interested in it. But it's enough to suggest to somebody reading LinkedIn or on his CV that he's got an ability to do stuff that he's previously made claims for, either on his CV or his LinkedIn profile. It's a really clever way of being able to compartmentalize fairly complex events. And as I say, 3 to 8 of these on your LinkedIn profile is a pretty good indicator and really adds a lot of value. Now, over time, as I suggested, it works really well for contractors. You just add to this portfolio, and then you can either choose to put them in LinkedIn or not, have them all in LinkedIn or just a subset, and you can then control to some degree how people see you and how your business case is formed by the examples that you choose. For many of the contract clients that we've worked with, we've just helped give them a portfolio of these things from which they can select and decide how to go to market with them. They're also really good, if you have got your own personal website, they're a really good piece of content to put into a case study area of your website. So those are the 3 areas, the 3 key areas, I should say, at least. Professional headline, summary, and projects. Get those 3 right, and that's the largest chunk of what we'd call the business case as to why somebody should be interested in you. Get the content right, you'll appear in more searches. The proposition right, you'll, after having appeared in more searches, be noticed by more people and accepted as a valid proposition more of the time, with evidence to back it up. That's the engine behind a good LinkedIn profile, if you like. Now, as yet, a bit like on the CV actually, because it's about now we start talking on the CV about finally describing where this individual has actually worked. And for a lot of people, that's a lot later than they probably start with their profile or CV right now. So we never recommend opening up with, as the first thing on your CV other than your name, where you currently or have most recently been working, because that's not the differentiating factor for most people. So it is appropriate, of course, that you do put some information on LinkedIn, just as you would on your CV, about your experience and the positions you've held. But on LinkedIn particularly, it ought just to be a summary, not masses and masses of detail. And it ought to be focused on your deliverables, particularly as a contractor. So folk aren't interested in your duties and responsibilities. I mean, that's certainly true of permies, but it's even more true of contractors. There's no relevance really in what your duties and responsibilities were, other than giving some kind of scale, scope and outline of your role. But what people are really interested in is what you've actually done. What have you delivered in the time that you were at whatever employer it was? So the focus has to be on achievements. And broadly, this is only a broad indication because it does depend a little bit on what you're trying to do, where you're heading, and on what experience you have. But as a broad indicator, that detail, so much as it is, ought only to be for the last 8 to 10 years, roughly. LinkedIn is again, different from the CV. You're not obliged to load everything onto it, and I'll talk about that very shortly, actually, about some of the myths about LinkedIn and what it encourages you to do, which you don't need to necessarily follow. But giving it all the information about your career can sometimes not help. Now, it does depend. For some people, it might add value. But for most people, the average person, it doesn't add value to detail everything under the sun. What you want it to be is a shop window on your skills, abilities, and talents. And most people will be selected and engaged in some manner based on what's recently happened, not what happened in the 90s or the 80s or the 70s or even the 60s. It's just not relevant to go back that far. So, just a few other bits and pieces about the profile as the core content, and I've not really talked about things like education and what have you. Things like education on the CV are important. On LinkedIn, it's a sort of an optional extra. If you've got specific academic qualifications, degree, formal professional qualifications like Prince 2, yes, of course, they can go into LinkedIn. There's no harm with that at all. In fact, that's quite productive and constructive. You don't want to date any of that stuff, interestingly. You just want to flag it as the level that you're at, in a way much like you would on the CV. Other than that, though, what we've talked about would form a nice, strong business case. So professional headline, summary, projects, experience, as LinkedIn calls it, but your career history. And that's pretty much it. The other areas where you can affect things to your advantage, one of them is called skills and expertise. And on LinkedIn, that allows you to have up to 50. And you'll probably know about this if you've got a profile. It's this sort of area where you can pre-select skills that you have, like project management, stakeholder engagement, stakeholder management. You could put some of the behavioral stuff, but it's, again, pretty unproductive. And you'll get people endorsing you for those skills, and their little photograph will appear next to that skill if they think you do have that skill. The real value of that area is if you populate that with the right skills, it just enhances your ability to be found, because a lot of people will take the easy route and they'll say, well, I'm really interested in people with certain skills, and they'll just click the matrix of skills, and you'll pop up if you match more of the skills than anybody else. So it's worth using as many of those 50 skills as you can. Most people get lazy. They run out of steam after about 10, 12, 13, 20, something like that, and you'll have a whole heap list. And when I write a CV for people, and when my colleagues write CVs for people and then do their LinkedIn profile, I've never yet had a case where we couldn't double the number of skills they've got if they haven't used their full allocation. And so it's worth using that full allocation because it will attract more interest. You will become more visible to more people. Don't just select any old rubbish, of course. You have to select stuff that you can justify and back up. But most people don't get anywhere near using the full 50 skills. Where you can, it's appropriate to write recommendations for other people because they link back to you and help build your profile. But you should only be doing that where you justifiably can make a call on it. There's too much backslapping on LinkedIn. That's one of the downsides. And it's very easy to, oh, I'm your mate, you're my mate, let's recommend each other. To most people, most of the time, that's incredibly obvious. It doesn't add any value. So be very careful about what you do with recommendations. But if you can generally provide good testimonial evidence about somebody where you would appear to be the credible author of that experience and a valid author, then it's a good thing to do. I'll come on to you getting recommendations shortly. Where possible, again, it's sort of an optional extra, but it does help. Join groups that you have an interest in, a mutual interest in. Now, this can be really useful if you're trying to shift emphasis. If you're trying to make a claim that you've been, I don't know, let's say you've been 5, 10 years doing something, and you really want to move outside of that in a new direction, and you're lucky enough to get somebody's attention, and you're saying, look, trust me, I could be really good at this. Yeah, it's a real interest of mine. I don't have the experience per se, but I know I could handle it. If somebody then takes a look at your LinkedIn profile, so they sort of believed you at face value right now, however you've managed to do that, the recruiter or hiring manager is thinking, okay, let's just check them out, maybe give them the benefit of the doubt. If they hit your LinkedIn profile and there's no evidence to back up that enthusiasm or passion for a particular subject matter or new direction, you're potentially losing it. People might look at it and say, well, you know, you've said this about your interests and enthusiasm for a new area, but where's the evidence? You know, there's this group I'm aware of or I'm a member of, and you're nowhere to be seen. So a clever trick is, if you're trying to shift emphasis, join groups, associations that represent that interest area. Some of them will require a sort of a tick. You know, so it may not be as easy as just joining the group. You've got to get some kind of authority given. but if you can, go for it. So that little logo and group appears on your profile, so anybody checking you out can think, okay, yeah, they said they were interested in this, and lo and behold, they're a member of this group, so that shows some, and they might not dig any further than that, but it will just reaffirm in their mind that you're a serious person and that what you told them is true, and you can back it up. Even if you're not shifting emphasis, just joining groups that represent your industry area or profession is a wise idea, because it does add credibility. Taking that a step further, if you can and are willing and want to, participating in the discussions that those groups have can be a clever thing to do for the same reasons. But again, that is optional. I wouldn't suggest it's going to make a huge change, but for some people it could be enough for people to just take you more seriously. I said I'd talk about recommendations of people recommending you. There is a stat that you're 3 times more likely to get inquiries as a consequence of people searching on LinkedIn if you have recommendations made of you. But the same rule applies. It's got to be from somebody credible who's managed you, hired you, engaged you, and it's obvious that that is such. Getting people who've worked for you is sort of okay, but not great. Getting people who've worked alongside you, ditto, and getting somebody that just appears to be somebody you go to the pub with every Friday is obviously normally fairly obvious. But if you can manage that properly, and this is where going back to previous clients, if they have, or if they're open-minded about giving recommendations, don't have an issue with that, that can be a really useful mine to quarry. Bottom line, though, to any of this is that the technical aspects of LinkedIn, whilst sort of important, are shaded by having appropriate content. And I said I'd go on about content, and hopefully that message has come across. It's the most important thing. Get the content sorted, and you will get more interest, and you will appear in more searches. So it's not about technically fulfilling every single last LinkedIn requirement to submit various details to it. It's about getting the right content, the right message, just as it is with your CV, just as it would be if you had your own website. It's all about the message. And the note at the bottom of this screen is quite interesting, actually, because I think the invites suggested this. If you're applying for a job in a traditional sense or an opportunity, you probably sent your CV to initiate the process. And of course, people can only judge you based on the contents of your CV. So that goes back to my acid test. You're getting interviews is because somebody likes what they see on the CV. The vast majority of the people that then are making a decision about whether to interview you or not will check you out on LinkedIn before going any further. And that stat's getting higher and higher and higher. And indeed, lots of people will have arrived at you because they've seen the LinkedIn profile before anything else, in fact. But it does reinforce the fact that if you've got disconnects between your CV and your LinkedIn profile, it may harm you. And in some bizarre cases, it might actually help you. But in most cases, what tends to happen is somebody gets a CV, they look at it, they think, could be interesting, let's check them out. They might check you out beyond LinkedIn, in fairness. They might check out all sorts of other social media. But if they focus on LinkedIn, what they don't want to see is disconnects, because that might be a reason as to dismiss somebody because they get a completely different message. A few other bits and pieces before we wrap up. If you're looking to contact people and connect with them, and most of you, if you've tried that, you know you get that little box saying, in effect, hi, I'd like to connect with you. Particularly if you're trying to target more senior people, people who could make a decision about using your services, do not go with the default message, because it just looks like you couldn't be bothered, and that you're like many people that will try to connect with you, which is just saw your name, want to connect with you, got other more important things to be getting on with, but anyway, here we go, send, and they get that little message. Put something in there that's more personal. Take some time to think about it. Again, it makes a big difference. It differentiates you from the average person. There's something called a vanity URL. If you're familiar with LinkedIn, you get a URL which you can point people at. Normally, it's a whole jumbled heap of numbers and letters, maybe with part of your name stuck in there. You can overwrite that. I won't get into the technical details right now. It's fairly obvious on your LinkedIn profile. You can take a look at the URL as it currently stands. You can edit it, and you can set it to something a little bit more friendly if it's available. So it's a bit like setting up an email account or a domain. Type in what you'd like, see if it's available, and if you can have it, they'll give it to you. It just makes it easier for people to remember and for you to communicate to people on your CV or otherwise. Fair few people say, should we put a photograph on LinkedIn? General consensus is yes, but that's notwithstanding the fact that some people may have an issue with that, and that's fine. There's no rule that says you must have it. Bizarrely, LinkedIn will increment your profile score, which I'll come on to in a bit, if you add a photograph, but that doesn't mean to say you should do it, particularly if you fear any kind of discrimination might kick in, and those are justifiable reasons as to why you might not want to have a photograph. Whatever those reasons may be, now is not the time and place, but if you've got an issue, then you'll know what that might be, and therefore it's up to you whether you put your photograph or not. LinkedIn, for those again that are familiar with it, will score your profile. So for many, you'll get all excited as the little bar, sometimes it's a circle, sometimes it's a bar chart, will say that you've gone from a basic to an intermediate, or an intermediate to an advanced, or an advanced to an expert, or an expert to an all-star. I think that's all of them. Don't be fooled by thinking that you've somehow entered the hallowed turf of somewhere by having an expert profile. As I said, you could add a photograph to LinkedIn and it might flip you over the threshold from one score to another. But that photograph could be of a monkey, and that's not going to help your employment chances. So LinkedIn, often people approach it and think the more I hurl in its general direction, the better my profile will be, and the better I will be seen by an individual. And there is a massive disconnect. The profile strength has got nothing to do with the strength of your message to your target audience. Absolutely nothing. The content is key. How people read that content is really important. You could have a basic profile scored as basic, and it'd be a whole heap more effective to your business interests than having an all-star profile, because the content could be a heap of rubbish in the latter case. So do not be fooled by that. Do not think that by having a really high-scored profile in LinkedIn's eyes that materially makes you a better person than somebody with a basic profile or a more effective person. There's no connection between the two, or very little, I should say. And finally, don't feel compelled to stick with the default setting of how LinkedIn lays out your profile. It's not as if it's hideous to start with, in fairness. But, for example, I mentioned the three really big drivers behind LinkedIn's business case, if you like. So professional headline, you can't do anything about that. It is where it is underneath your name. The summary ought to be the first major piece of text that people read. So it's there by default. You could change it if you want to do, but there's little reason as to why you should. But projects, if you do load any projects, will by default head towards the bottom of your profile, which isn't very helpful. So you can drag and drop most of the sections, and our recommendation would be you grab hold of projects and stick them underneath your summary. It's a toss-up really between whether you'd have them before or after your actual experience. So that depends a little bit on who you are, what you've been doing, what you're trying to do going forwards. But most people, we tend to go projects higher, experience lower, because the projects are examples of what you've done and delivered, whereas your experience is a little bit more matter of fact. And for some people, actually may not be the real thing they want to lead with. In fact, it might actually be harmful for people's eyes to land on that too quickly. So you can control what people see to some degree. I said right up front to those that were on early doors that and I sort of semi-boasted that we knew what worked in the marketplace, and it, you know, it's a genuine comment. We do know what works in the marketplace. More importantly, we know that it actually works. On screen now is a quote from somebody that we actually got email us today in the office, which Matt sent me this afternoon. Somebody who went through this kind of a process, decided to seek professional help. They were, as you can see, a fairly senior person, so a professional savvy person. didn't have the time to sort stuff out. I think had been struggling in the first place. Lo and behold, as you can see if you want to read that text, primarily because of getting their LinkedIn profile, they've managed to sort a pretty decent contract and wanted to let us know about it. And that's a problem. We're getting this very regularly. You need to hear from people if they've been struggling in the marketplace, if they get some success, they want to take more of the business case to the audience. So, very briefly as we wrap up, before I move on to questions, what hopefully we've done by way of the 2 webinars that we've run now via Contractor Weekly is get across the message that if you're getting interviews, if you're happy with that hit rate, you probably don't need to take any action. What you've got is sufficient to see you through and weather the storm, so to speak, and get you interest, engagement, and ultimately more business. But if you're not happy with that, judge it by, if nothing else, the acid test. Now, you might be getting interviews, but not enough to convert into actual offers of contracts or opportunities. The acid test, therefore, is getting enough activity to land the next piece of work. And if you're not happy with that, what I'd implore you to do is do something. We see too many people who've left it too long, thinking that something will magically change in the marketplace, and it doesn't. Well, actually, that's untrue. It can do. If the market gets to such extent where whatever your message is, it's pretty much the only message, and therefore you're the only person left at the table, then of course you might get a chance to participate in a discussion about a new opportunity. But most areas of skill are not that depleted yet. The economy hasn't turned around to such a degree. So if you're struggling to get interest and engagement of any sort, do something about it. You have a choice. You fix it yourself or you get somebody to help you. If you go down the route of fixing it yourself, then that's grand. You hopefully got enough information, particularly if you attended the webinar on CVs, to know where you should be heading. But if you need professional help, then we can help. And it's all about building this business case for your target audience. And I promised a special offer, which is the same as those people who were on the CV webinar were offered, incidentally, which I suppose is only fair. If you want to get your CV and LinkedIn profile sorted, ordinarily that costs £349 plus of this month, so Monday 31st, we're doing that for £275 plus VAT. So it's quite a hefty discount. And that's to rewrite your CV completely from scratch and rewrite your LinkedIn profile completely from scratch to fit the business target audience that you want us to target. For those that saw the CV webinar and are considering getting their CV written in both formats, so that's both the traditional chronological style and the case study contract style, we'll do that for $399 plus VAT. In effect, you're getting one CV and then the second one for half price. That's a fairly sizable discount. That will suit certain people. As I say, for those that weren't on that webinar, if you want to ask any questions about that, please visit this website, which is where the special offer will be, and you'll land on a page like this, just so you know what it looks like, so that if you are interested, I'll paste the link shortly into the question facility. Right, that should be on its way to you. But if you, as I say, if you are interested in that, you'll click on a link and it will take you to this page so that you know that that is what you should be expecting to see. And then what happens is we contact you and find out what you're trying to do, arrange a consultation time that suits. If you want to take advantage of this offer and park it for a month or 2 months, that's up to you. You can do that. Some people choose to do that. If you want to use it straight away and get cracking, equally, we'll do that. From 0 to getting a CV, lead time is roughly 7 to 10 days, including the consultation and getting the CV sorted, just so you know. But if you wanted to park it for a month or 2, but take advantage of the offer, you're entirely able to do that. As I say, the only downside to all of this, apart from you have to spend a bit of money, but yeah, it's probably the best way you could spend kind of money if you're going to further your career and business proposition, is that you'd need to make that decision by close of play next Monday, the 31st. A little bit there, but hopefully you got something useful out of that, and it complements the CV session for those that are on it, but hopefully gives enough of an indication to people that if you choose to use LinkedIn for whatever means, if you get that message sorted, it will work for you and give some strong clues in terms of how that message should be structured and the kind of content you need to be aspiring to have on your profile. You can do the maths both, you know, how far away are you from that so-called best practice. You can make that assessment, and then you can decide whether it might be worth investing a few quid in get a contract quicker, or a higher value contract, and then you can do the maths and work out whether that's worth investing. Now, I promised I'd come back to the questions, so let me just pause the slide so that people